Zach. I am the chair of the advisory committee. We are being recorded, just everyone needs to be aware of that. And I will start off by taking attendance. So I will go down the list and please, for committee members, please respond yes that you are present. Kristen Balish. No, I don't think we have.
No, she had a conflict tonight, Arthur.
Thank you. Brian Bichkowski.
I'm on.
Very well. Michael Huff.
Here.
Jonathan Hurwitz.
Here.
Jackie Katz.
Here.
Susan Klein was going to join us, but I don't see her yet. David Lutz. He's here. Are you muted, David? I don't quite have.
I'm here.
Outstanding. Thank you, sir. Welcome. Kiara Moore. I believe Kiara is with us. Perhaps not.
I think you skipped Mike too.
And no, I got Mike Huff. Did I? Mike Huff, yes, present.
He's muted.
Yeah, I'm here.
And Kiara is just joining us, as well as Susan. I'll have them chime here a second. Little joining button. Kiara, you are with us tonight. Please say you're present. Maybe she didn't quite make it in.
She's connecting now, Arthur.
Okay, and Susan Klein is also connecting.
Susan, are you here?
I think she's still joining or she's trying to.
Okay.
Kiara, are you fully in yet? I see you're in and muted.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you, Kiara. Okay, well, I think Susan will join us here shortly. Okay, thanks everyone. Tonight's agenda, we are going to discuss recent and very important developments in the school budgets. Wanted to turn it over to, I know we'll go ahead and start with Dr. Alardi, who is with us tonight. I believe that everyone had a chance to have the chance to read the letter which went out to parents. Ingrid, if you want to go ahead and describe briefly the essence of the letter, we can then get straight into questions. Thank you.
Sure. So as you saw in the letter and the memo that I sent to the board, over the last 3 weeks, we've had some significant changes to the school budget that necessitated us providing notice to some of our teachers of potential reductions in force. The primary changes are not a result of local funding. So when we presented our budget to both the select board and to the advisory board, we were asked to make $285,000 of reduction based on the town's projections of decreases to state revenue. We have made those adjustments to our budget and we're able to close that gap by not filling some new positions. So not filling the new administrative position we had proposed. We are not filling an increase in the team chair position as we had proposed. We have reduced the expense side of the budget in several areas. We have reduced our technology replacement budget, and we are also not refilling a technology position. So we were able to close that gap without any reductions in force or any layoffs. What has changed since that time are two things. At the elementary level, and this does not apply to KP, but at the elementary level, we have had some significant enrollment over the last several weeks. And we, as a result of that enrollment, have new obligations for absorbing a special education out of district placeholder, as well as some significant staffing requirements to meet the needs of students that are new to the district. Those are unbudgeted costs. And I know we've talked with the advisory board many times before about how special education costs can vary, and we are required, if students enroll, to implement the IEP that they bring with them, which is why in the past we have always carried forward a special education placeholder in our budget. with the advisory board's agreement. And at the end of the fiscal year, if we don't use that placeholder, we've always returned it to the town. As you're aware, we do not have that placeholder in this year's budget. We are instead looking to establish a special education stabilization fund that would help us offset those unexpected costs. But that is subject to vote and approval at town meeting. So we cannot count on that at this point until it's actually voted and approved. Additionally, we have a couple of challenges based on the fact that the Massachusetts Department of Ed has not yet released the guidance that has been promised in terms of what the fall reopening is going to look like. With that uncertainty, there's several areas of our budget that could be significantly impacted by different directions the Department of Education could go in. One of the things that they are talking about is bringing in a reduced number of students and not reopening the way we typically run the schools. So if we are looking at a situation where we have a reduced number of students coming to school, we fund part of our staff salaries for our preschool, a teacher and 3 assistants from tuition revenue that we bring in. If we can only have students come half of the time, we budget about $140,000 that we use to fund salaries through tuition. If that's cut in half, we have a shortfall there that will impact our budget. Additionally, the food service program is funded by revenue that we bring in from meal sales. Based on guidance from the Department of Education, we do expect that might go down significantly, and we still have to fund the cost of the food service director and staff. So those are some things we're looking at. We also don't know what additional unknown costs we may have as a result of the guidance from the Department of Education. This situation in terms of noticing staff of potential reductions is in large part a timing issue. The teacher's contract and state statute requires you to provide notice of a reduction in force to teachers no later than June 15th. And it is airtight after that time. Under no circumstances can positions be reduced or eliminated. So given that we have so many unknowns in the budget, we did have to provide that notice in case our budget is not appropriated at town meeting. And we have concerns about the unknown special education costs and the reopening guidance that is not out yet. So we had to protect the district by providing that notice. Since that time, we've been working really hard on a solution for the decreased revenue that we may see from preschool tuitions. We have been able to work collaboratively with the town, and some of our expenses that we've incurred as a district from March 12th to now, we have been able to charge against the town's CARES grant. So I think you probably heard the select board mentioned the town has $1,054,000 for a CARES Act grant that you can submit COVID related costs. We were able to submit about $93,000 of current expenses to that grant, which we are hoping we can then change how we've paid out some of the pre-K salaries this year to leave that balance in the revolving account to cover the tuition loss for next year. So we've been working on solutions like that. We also furloughed some of our food service staff about 6 weeks into the closure because it became clear that we would not be reopening. We're hoping to use the savings from that to offset potential loss of revenue to the food service program next year. The other thing that we've been able to do, and that I would be seeking support from the advisory board, we are closing out this year's fiscal budget. We do have some savings that we weren't expecting because we haven't had to use any substitutes since the closure. We haven't brought people in. So we have savings in the substitute line. We also have some transportation savings. And we have, various expenses that we have small savings in. Altogether, typically at the end of the year, whatever we don't spend, we return to the town. We will have about $250,000 remaining, and we would like to put all of that into the Special Education Stabilization Fund. So the warrant article reads right now that we would be contributing $100,000. We would prefer to fund that at the full $250,000 to absorb and provide us some protection as we go into next year for these unexpected costs. That's pretty much where we are. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Yes, this is very complex. I know. I appreciate you walking us through the overview, Dr. Alardi. Now, let me just start with a quick preface here. So there's been changes. Our warrant has already been mailed. It sounds like at least one of the articles that relate to the Special Education Stabilization Fund that you will be making a motion at town meeting to increase that particular number. So that's something new. But mostly I wanted to pass along the very generous offers that both Dr. Alardi as well as Paul Zinni had made to answer questions before town meeting. So the purpose of this meeting tonight is really to help orient people prior to town meeting. The town meeting next Wednesday, it's going to be exciting enough already. So I'd like us to be able to ask what questions that people need to ask early so we can get a good understand where what people want to speak to and increase folks' comfort level prior to us arriving on Wednesday. So I don't really expect that we're going to be making motions tonight. But again, this is mostly a Q&A session so that we go into town meeting as collected and well-informed as is reasonable. And I will now just make my quick preface. I see folks already have their hands up. Outstanding. So if you would like to ask a question, I start off with the advisory committee members first. Please, if you go to your participants button on your Zoom application, your device, your computer, whatnot, if you click on participants, you'll see a list of everyone comes up. At the bottom, you'll have the opportunity to click to raise your hand. I will acknowledge people as their hands are raised. I do appreciate people being to the point. Please have one question to ask. I will then, once that's answered, ask if you have a follow-up question. And then I will go on to the next individual. Please be additive to the conversation. And with that being said, Jonathan Hurwitz, you have the first question. Yes, sir.
Great.
I didn't know if you want to hear from KP as well, so that we can go together. I'm happy to answer them now, but there's a lot of overlap in terms of this.
Oh, is there? Okay, so let's go ahead and Paul, did you want to go ahead and present, or somebody on your team?
I'd be very happy to. I want to start off by prefacing that KP appreciates tremendously the work that all three towns have been trying to do to provide us with a responsible budget. And that's in fact what they did. We initially asked for a 3.49% increase, which we considered level funding, level service. And the three towns came back collaboratively and said that although their assessments are different, they would collaboratively give us a 2.5% increase. For us, that's an overall decrease of $330,000 or so. A little over 100,000 of that is Norfolk's reduction. I can't stress enough that we planned on that amount, and that's what we are still hoping for as we move forward. We have three town meetings that all need to approve a budget for us, and I need at least 2/3 of them to approve the same amount for me to have a budget going into July 1. And as it stands now, both Rentham and Norfolk, and well, actually all three towns are poised to support that that amount. But one of those three towns is now moved their town meeting into July. So if Rentham and Norfolk don't have a unified amount next week, then I won't have a budget as of July 1, and I'll have to go into a 1/12 budget scenario. Now, like Dr. Alardi, you saw a notice that on Friday, we had to notify 36 teaching staff that we were moving forward with reduction in force. Please know that that is not in relationship or not because of the reduction that the three towns had voted initially that I just spoke about. It's solely in regards to the fact that we have a very unclear understanding of what state aid will look like for King Philip. And while state aid comes directly to the towns, and school systems like the elementary school district then get their allocation from that, KP receives its state allocation directly. And the amounts that you are all awarding KP at your town meetings are based on the projection of state aid that came out with the governor's budget back in January. Since that time, we have heard that the state's budget is at least $6 billion shy of its revenue projections, and that it's looking at somewhere between a 20 and 25% shortfall in revenue. That's the last projection I heard, and that was over a month ago. But when the recession came in 2008, towns received a 10% cut to state aid. I will tell you, and I told the school committee on Monday evening, if we received a 10% cut in state aid, as projected initially based on the 2008 scenario, plus the 330,000 that we were shortfall from the 3 towns, we would be looking at a $1.2 million reduction to our grant. Because the schools were closed for 3 months and through some creativity, we would be able to absorb those cuts or that cut without any of the current staff who are employed being laid off. That's not to say that we would not have a reduction in staff. We have staff members that are retiring, staff members, new positions that we had built into the budget that we would not be able to fill. But no staff member who is currently working for us would be affected at that level. But we are hearing from the communities, from our state legislators, that they have no timeline as to when they will be voting on a budget and what that budget will look like. But many of us have been told that we should be planning for a 15 to 20% cut in state aid. Now, again, I am hopeful that that is not the reality, but if that is the case, that comes directly to KP, and that reduction would happen after your town meetings. And so your town meetings provided us an allocation based on the projection in January, but my state aid would come in somewhere between 10 and 20% less than what we projected back in January. A 20% cut in state aid would be $1.7 million. And then add on top of that the 1% cut across the 3 towns that we received. We're now looking at a shortfall of over $2 million that we would have to make up. Couple that with the fact that, as Dr. Alati shared with you, we have no plan in place from the commissioner telling us of what it will look like to open in the fall, other than the fact that we know it's going to look different and we know that there will be safety issues in place. And so we don't know what our additional costs will be, so we can't budget for them because we don't know what they are. We are hearing different scenarios depending on where we are as a state as far as cases go. And so I don't know what I'm budgeting for, and I could be facing as much as a $2 million revenue shortfall at the state level, not from the communities. And so, as Dr. Alati shared with you, I have a contractual obligation to let staff members know by June 15th if there's a possibility they will not have a position in the fall. And so we had to give those notices out to allow us to calculate bumping issues and to allow us to notify those staff that there was a possibility that they may not be back. We are keeping our fingers crossed that we have adequate news from the state and that we can call back as many of those staff members as quickly as possible. But there are just too many variables that we can't answer for us to take a chance and not give those notices on June 15th. And then, as Dr. Alati said, we can't give them after that date. We would have to keep all of those staff for at least 1 year after that. And if the worst happened, we couldn't do that. So again, we had to do that out of an abundance of precautions. I met with all staff members on Friday morning, and I explained that in even much more detail than what I've just provided to you now. And and the staff do understand where we're at. But like I said, that's where we are at this time. But I can't stress enough, the reason for that was not because of the budgets that the towns are projecting for us. We understand that you're all struggling in towns in very different ways. Each of you has different struggles that you're looking at, but you have been very generous in trying to meet KP's needs. And what you're proposing, as long as state aid is not impacted dramatically, is a fair budget that we can work within. And so I can't stress enough that, while I do hear from the community that there may be people out there that might wish us to change this amount at this point, I really do need 2 towns before June 30th to vote the same budget. And the one that's been put on the table was the one that I'm planning on and I'm hoping for. So again, I don't want to belabor that point, but I just wanted to maybe stress that. And again, to thank the select board, to thank the advisory committee. You've all been very supportive, and we feel supported. The school committee feels supported, and there are just too many unknowns for us to predict at this time.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Paul. So with all the presenters having spoken. Jonathan, you are actually up next. I clicked the button to take your hand down. Apologies, but you were first. So if you still have the question, please go ahead.
Yeah, I guess maybe one quick comment and then a question if I can. I didn't really sense what's changed in the last 2 weeks. Like all of the reasons both the Norfolk schools and KP have stated of why we're in this position. I mean, they make sense. It's clear we're going to have a state budget shortfall. It's clear that that's going to translate to lower state aid. I'm just a little curious as to what's changed in the last 2 weeks. So all of these things that we've just discussed right here, I feel like we could have known this for months, right? I think that it's just maybe a little strange to me to wrap my head around of all of the discussions we've had and all the meetings and all the planning around budgets and discussions, that this as a possibility, if not a probability, wasn't really raised. It just kind of feels like it all of a sudden turned into a fire drill, and I'm a little lost on really what changed from the state aid or the lack of clarity around state aid that all of a sudden kind of snapped the kind of the notice and pink slips into gear.
So,
With
Jonathan,
Understood.
nothing
So,
is
so
actually-
the question. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was
Go
going to say,
ahead.
Jonathan, nothing has actually changed. I've been saying that we are unclear about state aid in any presentation I've had. But what's happened is the June 15th deadline came upon us, and we still don't have any guidance whatsoever from the state. And so we do have that in our contract. And we're not anticipating that, even though we gave out 36 notices, that 36 staff members will not be back. We just don't know what this will look like, and we don't know where the bumping will occur because we don't have a final dollar amount. So we had to follow the guideline of the June 15th to give that notice of the potential that a teacher might not have a job next year.
I understand. So
I can speak. There has been some changes in Norfolk, so I can share.
yes, no, I mean, I understand the difference in the special education costs that popped up. So let me just jump to my questions, and it's specific for Dr. Lardy. Has there been any discussion or consideration of reinstituting some fees for items that were in past years fee-based, but as part of the budget buildup over the past few years have been reduced? And I'm thinking specifically full-day kindergarten and busing. Has that looked at as an option to help cover any gaps here?
So we haven't looked at those things yet because, again, these are new for us. The two things that were changed were the unexpected special education costs, and the Department of Ed has been indicating up until recently that they're planning on a hybrid return where we would only have half of our students at any given time. If that's the case, then we have potential savings in other lines, such as transportation, that would help us mitigate these costs. Just last Wednesday night, the department pulled that back and said districts should not be making any assumptions for budget planning or purposes or for staff projections about what reopening would look like, because they are reconsidering their guidance with the public health officials in the state. So that kind of threw a curveball in things because it just changed the projection in what we were expecting to hear from the state for the last probably 6 weeks. We could look at those things. I think to add fees, the transportation would not be possible. What the law allows you to charge a transportation fee for students that live 2 miles within 2 miles of the school district. But the underlying assumption is that there's a safe walking route for kids to school. We don't have sidewalks. We don't have crossing guards in Norfolk. So that assumption doesn't fly. And we have had, I have consulted with legal counsel around this, because when we had fees in place, we were challenged on that. And we will not be supported in that. Implementing a fee that's arbitrary when kids, even within 2 miles, can't safely walk to school wouldn't fly. Kindergarten fees, we could certainly take a look at. I don't know that that will be a good option, because at this point, 80% of communities within the Commonwealth do not charge for kindergarten. We would be among a minority if we were to reinstitute that. And additionally, we don't know what reopening will look like. It's very possible that students will only be in school half of the time and will be learning remotely. And I don't know how that would impact that. But everything will be on the table. If we hear from the state that there's a shortfall, it won't necessarily come from teachers. We had to provide that contractual notice We have other positions within the district, paraprofessional positions, food service staff, clerical. There is no legal notice deadline. We would be looking at everything. We would be looking at where else we might have to potentially reduce staff. We would be able to consider that. We don't know yet whether or not that's necessary. It depends on what the reopening guidance looks like. There is, and I think I sent it to Arthur, there is a resolution going around that school committees and select boards and advisory boards are considering signing on to, and that is calling for the state to fully fund any costs that are related to state mandates for school reopening. So if the state requires us to be taking students' temperatures or socially distancing on transportation, they're tying that to an unfunded mandate and requesting that the state cover those additional costs. So that would be something that would be very helpful for us if the advisory board considers, and it would help close the potential gaps that both KP and the elementary schools will be dealing with. Because again, they are coming on the state side.
If I could just add one thing to what Dr. Alati said, because I think she said it so eloquently. Part of our problem is we have thoughts about where we might have to cut, but they look very different depending on what scenario we're looking at in September. So if there's a spike in the summertime and the rates of infection go up and we're told that we can't open the first day, brick and mortar, that we have to continue with distance learning, we know that that's going to have to look different in the fall than it did in the spring. We're going to have to move to a synchronous format for educating our students. But we know that the staffing to do that will look different. There may be certain staff members that we at that point would have to furlough or lay off because we wouldn't be in the buildings. Whereas if in fact we opened and there were certain requirements, there might be a shift in who we needed at that point or who became the most essential personnel within that building. But we can't make those decisions because we have no idea what reopening looks like right now.
Okay, thank you. Did you get your follow-up question in, Jonathan?
I'm fine. I allow some other questions to go, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Klein, yes, your question, Susan.
Hi. Okay. Can everybody hear me? I have terrible Wi-Fi, so I apologize
Yes.
if I
We
sound
can hear you.
choppy.
Hear
Okay. Thank you. Ingrid, or Dr. Alardi, excuse me.
You can call me Ingrid, it's fine.
That's okay. I know I can when we speak personally, but I wanted to address you as Dr. Alardi publicly, so I apologize for that. When you and I have spoken, and as well as what you've said tonight, we've talked about the 250 instead of the 125, but just to be clear for the public as well as for the rest of the advisory board, originally the 125 was a budgeted line item for the town, meaning it was not in your budget, but we would have put 125,000 into this fund. Are you saying that you're making up the difference to get to the full 250, meaning you're putting in, somebody do that math for me, 75, 50, 125 yourself, or because of your savings, or are you putting in the full 250 yourself because of the savings? And I know before anyone says anything, I understand it's all the town's money because she would have to give it back, but I'm just trying to figure out if it's a actual $125,000 savings to the 2021 budget, because that money was already spent for 2020. So could you clear that up for me?
I can. So the article as it's worded right now has a startup of 100,000, and that was coming from the money we were going to return to the town as a placeholder. I don't think the town is separately funding that. We were going to contribute the 100,000 from the placeholder that advisory board let us carry from last year. We're saying that we will have an additional 150,000 in savings, so we could contribute the full 250 from our budget savings this fiscal year, as opposed to returning that to the town at the end of the year to fund that. And that would put the stabilization fund at the cap, the maximum allowable for us to carry in that. And that would go a long way in providing protection for the unexpected costs that we've seen recently.
And just as a follow-up question, Arthur, well, not as much a follow-up question as a statement. if I understand it correctly, the unforeseen costs that you incurred or found out about after we approved the budget a couple of weeks ago, or not approved, but gave our support for. If you were to not get this stabilization fund article passed and you were not to get this funded fully, then it's not that it's tied to the teacher layoffs, but it would mean you would not be able to bring back as many as you had hoped once you have more information from DESE and guidelines for the fall, correct?
Again, yes, it certainly would mean we would not be able to bring people back quickly. It would depend, we would have to wait for the DESE guidance and be able to evaluate whether or not we can absorb some of the cost given the model, whether we'd have savings, but it would give us no protection and we don't have any other budget line to absorb that. So depending on what the DESE guidance is, it could significantly limit our ability to recall staff. It provides protection if our budget was passed as is and the stabilization fund is passed at the higher amount, we will have greater confidence that we can begin recalling teachers immediately.
Great. And how do I say this? Also, I'm just trying to make sure that everyone understands that it's not that if you don't get this fund, then you won't spend that money, because it is a special ed stabilization fund. If you don't get this fund approved, you still have to spend the money. Now you will just have to cut it from somewhere else, correct?
Exactly. And that's part of why we had to provide the reduction notices. So yes, thank you.
Yeah. I just wanted, I would like for, there's a lot of people who are not on the advisory board who are on this call. And I just want to make sure that everybody fully understands so that they know which position they're going to take at town meeting. And it just is unfortunately so close that our only real way to get the word out about whether to support it or not support it, in full disclosure, is to make it known through this, since it's a public meeting. So
yeah. Thanks, Susan.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
Actually, before I go to David's question, I do still have up on the screen the resolution. So speaking of supporting the schools, Dr. Lardy, you had mentioned it would be helpful for the advisory board to take action on the resolution. Like in terms of timing, like when would that's like at town meeting?
No, it has to happen in a meeting that we're having, Arthur.
Yes. So the school committee is going to consider this at their meeting on Thursday night, June 25th,
Okay.
and vote to either support or not support the resolution. And then that gets sent directly to the governor's office as they consider what they're going to do in terms of budget with regard to state aid. And additionally for us, we also get, while state aid goes to the town, we get some state funding directly. The Circuit Breaker is a reimbursement program for extraordinary costs for special education. That may not be fully funded. Some of our other grants may not be fully funded. So the new costs that we've absorbed is part of the budget shortfall, as well as potential cuts to those other state programs, which impacts KP as well. So this is
Regional transportation that KP has to deal with. We've never been funded at the full 100%. It's been somewhere closer to 80%, which we shared with you in some of our slides in our spring presentation. This could mean an even more dramatic lack of funding for regional transportation, which we're required to provide.
Okay, understood. So we would need to take action on this or at our meeting prior to town meeting, to your point, David. And you actually have the floor, Mr. Lutz. Yes, sir, your question.
Yeah, hold on. I guess part of my question's been answered, but I guess for Dr. Alardi, if we pass the budget as written, as proposed, and separating out the special, is there a way to dissect the layoffs based on fully funding the budget that was voted by the selectmen and supported by us versus the special ed cuts or potential special ed cuts and some of the other things? It sounds to me like at KP, it's almost entirely based on voting the budget versus not voting the budget. And at the Norfolk level, it's a confluence of things that are going to cause the layoffs. Is that an accurate assessment from both of you? And then Dr. Alardi, if you could address the mixed question.
Sure. So as far as the budget that the advisory board had voted and supported, that budget, if it was passed without any additional cost, that did not require any layoffs of staff. The special education potential additional costs would comprise part of the layoffs, as well as the unknown costs for reopening, because the Department of Ed has flip-flopped on what that would look like. So we had one plan in place and now it looks like it's changing. So it's those two things. I just want to be clear, when we have a reduction in force situation, we are not expecting to have to lay off all 16 positions. What it is, because it's a reduction in force, we noticed everybody that falls within a category, and the category is non-professional status teachers, and that means teachers that are in their first 3 years of teaching. So we provided notice to everyone that falls within that group because we don't know the depths of potential cuts that could be needed. They are not, it's not a performance-based cut, so we are not cutting individual teachers. We provided notice to everyone within that group. And that's typically how a reduction in force goes forward. I'm sure you've seen in the news, Franklin issued 103 notices. They're not looking at cutting 103 positions. They provided notice to everybody that falls within that first 3 years of teaching, with the expectation once the budget becomes clear, they will recall the staff members based on critical need. So we are not anticipating 16 layoffs. We provided notice to everyone within that category until we can determine the depths of cuts that might be needed. None are based on the initial budget that the select board proposed. They're based on additional costs that we've incurred for special education, some potential additional costs that we are possibly facing with the change in guidance from the Department of Ed for reopening, and potential additional cuts to state aid programs like Circuit Breaker and some of our state grants. So it's a precautionary measure that we've noticed those people. It is not a result of local funding. It is a reflection of changes to the state funding and some additional unknown costs.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
To
Yes, go
respond-
ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry to respond also to David's question separately for KP, but first to build off what Ingrid said about the number of people and the non-professional status. That is primarily true. It's exactly what happened in King Philip as well. And part of that is because of the complexity of bumping rights within a union and seniority rights. So for example, if the position that we needed to eliminate was the teacher of marine technology, we don't have one of those. That's why I'm making that up so that people don't think I'm talking about a particular position. But the marine technology teacher's position got cut. We can't offer marine technology any longer. But that teacher has been with us for 15 years and she has 3 different licenses. She can then bump someone with less seniority for a position to stay in the district, and the person with the least seniority is the person that leaves. But because we don't know what positions we won't be able to have back, we have to do a wider net of initial layoffs so that we have the flexibility, so that if that marine technology teacher is bumping somebody, there's actually a position available that she's certified to teach. So that becomes the tricky piece of that, and you don't know the dominoes until you play out all the scenarios, and that would mean running schedules especially at the middle and high school level to look at what elective students took. There's just so much that goes into that. As far as the statement initially about the meeting date for us, there are 2 different funding sources for us coming in right now. Approximately 10% of our, approximately 1/4 of our budget comes in at state aid. So we're expecting right now, based on the governor's budget back in January, about $8.5 million to come in the form of state aid. Some of it could be transportation reimbursement, the circuit breaker that Dr. Lottie mentioned, and a variety of other sources, our cherry sheet and such. The rest of our approximately $35 million budget is made up by the assessments that come in from the 3 towns. And the assessments are calculated based on, this is what we've got coming in from state revenue. The difference is divided based on that formula. At the town meeting, if 2 towns vote accordingly, then the assessment part of that happens. So in July 1, we would be getting the accurate amount from the 3 towns. We still don't know if we'll still get the $8.5 million from the state. And so that's not coming to us on July 1. So,
Right.
so that's where I don't want people to think that at the town meeting, if right now Rentham and Norfolk are still scheduled for June. Plainville has moved into July. They decided on Monday night at their select board meeting. So I don't want people to think that if Rentham and Norfolk decide in June and appropriate the same amount, the same percentage, that we're all set. King Philip can then start to bring back those staff members. My bigger concern is, will I still get that whole 8.5 million, or what percentage or what amount will I get instead? And that's the variable that I don't know about. And until I really have a better understanding of what that figure is going to be, then I can start to call people back based on that amount that we know. And I hope that explained things better.
Yes.
If I was confusing before, I apologize.
No, I was trying to get some clarification. Arthur, I have one sort of follow-up and then a kind of a comment or a statement. Does that work for you?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so the follow-up is, we had a very long meeting 3 to 4 weeks ago with school folks on it. And at the time, our meeting was set for July or June 24th. It would have been nice to maybe have a better sense that this might happen in 2 weeks or 3 weeks from when that meeting occurred. And then my follow-up comment is, I would appreciate in your budget presentations for next year, if you could identify the full amount of teachers that are in that three year and under class that may get notifications, because if this continues on like this, I'd like to know next March that you might be sending out notices on June 15th to another 20, 30 teachers on both sides, if you understand what I'm saying. It would be nice to have, it's a scare tactic, but it's a legitimate, it's a legitimate concern. The crap hit the fan this week, as you both know, when the notices went out.
Yeah. I appreciate the comment. We can certainly provide that information as to the number of teachers that fall within that category. Honestly, for the Norfolk elementary schools, we didn't know this 3 weeks ago. We had to make the decision. Again, we had some unexpected, unbudgeted costs that came up just last week for special education. And it was just last week that the state pulled back on their preliminary guidance with regards to reopening that would have helped us mitigate many of these costs. So the decision for the Norfolk elementary that we had to take this precautionary measure was made Wednesday night of last week. I met with the staff on Thursday and then sent the update to the advisory board first thing on Friday, as soon as I had notified people. But I do appreciate
My comment is I'd like to know how many teachers are eligible to get the notice next year.
Yep, we can certainly include that.
Give you, David. I'm sorry. And I want to be very honest about that. I left the classroom in 1994, and although this is the first time I've been involved in a RIF as a superintendent, and this is my 7th year as a superintendent, so I need you to understand that this is not something that happens every year. In my lifetime as an administrator, I've been involved in these before. Never has there been a perfect storm such as this. This is a pandemic. Normally what happens is we know what we need to run a district. We tell the town that, or towns in a regional. The town comes back and they say, yes, we can fund it, or no, we can't fund it. And this is how much the difference is. We look at that as a community, and we make the appropriate reductions, and we send out the appropriate notices. I have never, in all my years working in education, had so many variables that are not coming together with answers, and there is no timeline for them coming together with answers. We normally have a state, the state has normally begun to look at their budget. The governor gave theirs in January, and normally that is the floor that we build off of. We know that we often get a slightly higher budget when the state comes in and the House and Senate vote on their budget and they move it forward. Last year, we got a slight increase, when that final budget went through. But once we have that initial figure from the governor, that's based on what the state projects their revenue to be, and they give us that estimation, and we build everything else off of that. And we have a fairly clear picture of what'll happen. And we put that budget together to you. And if we asked you for 4% and you came back and you said, we can't give you more than 2%, and we heard something similar from Rentham and Plainville, we would already begin to be able to outline exactly what that would look like. And if it meant staff members, then it would be that small number of them. I would be very, very uncomfortable saying to you in a meeting in March next year that I have 43 non-professional status teachers on our committee, and therefore just plan that that's a possibility they can get RIF notices, because that is not the reality in any normal year.
But if
And I
asked
think
you
that that would
question
really
in a
be.
hearing, you would tell me that answer, correct? If I said to you in a hearing next March, how many non-professional teacher staff do you have? You would tell me that, correct?
Notices.
I'm going to ask you next year. that's all I'm saying. This has happened before, Paul. Prior to you being here, this happened. There was layoffs with hirebacks, and my kids went through the school system. They were both in the elementary school system last time this happened, and it was a total. I mean, it flipped people out. It's flipping people out now. I don't have kids in the schools anymore, but it's flipping people out now. It would be nice to know, and these people know this, I hope they know it, the teachers know it, that on June 14th, they might get this notice based on budgetary conditions. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
David, I just from the elementary perspective, we can certainly provide that information. I've only been in Norfolk for the last, this is my 8th year. We have never given out a notice since I've been here, but there is the potential, and next year could be a difficult budget year. I do want to say, I appreciate how much time and effort the advisory board puts into reviewing our budgets. I know every year when we come to the advisory board, you guys always have good questions. I'm often asked to come back with additional data, and I know that this is a difficult situation because we didn't have this data to give you, and I understand that that puts you in a difficult position. It certainly put all of us at the school level in a difficult position when the state's making last minute changes and adjustments. But we certainly will provide you the information in the future going forward. And again, this changed so quickly that I apologize that we couldn't be, I tried to get you information as quickly as possible, but I know that it's hard. It's hard for us because this is not the budget that we were expecting, and we were not expecting these changes either. So I do appreciate that. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for that. One thing that I would also just comment on before we go to Brian's question is that, I mean, some of these matters are more of a King Philip, school district. That's a bit of a different venue. We don't directly approve things in the same way. But to Paul's point, I mean, what I see happening, and again, I am not experienced when it comes to schools due to talking about recession, but this is also changes in how classes can be delivered in terms of transportation and how many people can be in a class. And there's a whole formula that's being made up on the fly. I mean, I don't want to say made up in the sense that people aren't trying to put a lot of thought into it, but I just don't think our entire school budget system is designed for this kind of speed. And it's causing some whiplash, and I think we all just need to get through it.
I understand that, and I can't imagine having to do this on a day-to-day basis, so I appreciate both.
Thank you both. And I apologize, David, if I came off strong, I also apologize for that. I heard how nicely Dr. Alati responded to you, and I don't want you to think that I was trying to be evasive in any way, but please know, I think this has been a very difficult week. If I could, just to say, when this finally became a reality that we were going to have to give people this kind of information, I can guarantee that it has been, I have not had a good night's sleep in a lot of days. That is the most horrible thing to have to tell anybody this. And we don't at all do it lightly. And so I guess I bristled a little bit, and I apologize, because I would never want to job because I just, and so because I just too broadly made statements that scared people. And so that's where I kind of reacted from. And I do apologize if that came off a little bit strong, David. So please know that. And I will share that I got my teaching position in 1986, and Proposition 2.5 had just really come around. The first 3 years as a teacher, the town that I worked in gave every non-professional status teacher, back then it was tenure, their layoff notice. And my 3rd year in, I received it the day after I closed on my house. My wife and I were both teachers and both got our notices the day after, and had to wait 2 months to be called back. So believe me, I just don't want anyone to have that kind of anxiety unless we think that there's a possibility that they need to know that and start looking for a job elsewhere. Then we want to give them this is possible.
Understood much.
So again, I'm sorry, that was a long soapbox. I
No, it's
apologize.
fine. Brian, yes, sir. Your question, Mr. Buchkowski.
I actually have a couple, so I'd be happy to defer until everyone's at least gone through once.
I think, well, let's go ahead and take you. I think it's going to be too complicated trying
All right,
to.
sounds fair. So first one is kind of a technical question, and it should be easy. I don't think, maybe it's for Todd, to move the funds from this year into the stabilization funds, it doesn't have to be declared as part of free cash available because we'd be making the move within FY20 instead of 21. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. An easy question that was actually easy. I like.
And your follow-up?
That's rare. So the other one is maybe less so. Understand the situation with KP and the two schools, so we can't make many changes that way because you need the two districts to agree on a common number. With the unexpected hit from potential state aid from the funds going to the elementary school, as well as the additional costs from the special education, I almost look at that as a town expense and not a school expense. And I was wondering if for Blythe, has there been any discussion on how to absorb that both reduction in revenue and increase in expenses across all accounts, as opposed to having it all sit within the elementary school?
So turning over to you, Blythe, does that question make sense to you?
Could you give it another go, Brian? I've got some background noise. I'm not sure I heard you correctly.
Yeah, so the question is the increase in special education transportation costs is a factor of someone coming into town, and that is a town expense that's a must-pay bill. And the reduction of state aid for the programs that Dr. Alardi mentioned are a reduction in revenue that would otherwise be a town expense. So has there been any discussion on burden sharing the reduction in revenue and increased expense outside of the school? Or is that intentional that what are essentially town bills be paid only by the school?
So I can respond to that if you want, Blythe, and then you can jump in.
Sure.
So as far as special education funding, that's an appropriation that the town provides to the school in our budget request. And so special education bills go to the school, not to the town. We're required to fund them. The Stabilization Fund is a tool that the town can put in place to help offset those.
I'm sorry, maybe I'm not explaining myself. So I think you're exactly right. The town gives the school the funding and the school has to pay. But ultimately, that is a town level bill that needs to be paid. My question is, we're forcing cuts within the school to pay a town level bill. Have we looked at other areas, other departments that could equally spread? Because our discussion a few weeks ago was when we went from the 2.4, whatever it was, to the 1.3 and then the 0.013, that was all based on an equal allocation of those cuts across all of the departments in Norfolk. And this is a change in estimated revenues and expenses that is solely being put on the schools. And I was wondering, why don't we go back and do that 1/3 allocation we had talked about a couple weeks ago?
Let me take a run at it now, Ingrid. So when we made our assumptions about reductions, we actually made larger reductions in the town side revenues, if you will. And specifically state aid for schools. But at the end of the day, we tried to be more, we're going to be fairer about the amount of the cuts based on overall the size of the various budgets. And we agreed on what we thought was a reasonable approach at the time. The hardest part that you've heard both Ingrid and Paul say is we just don't know exactly what further cuts will be and when we will know them. And I think we're all trying to be very cautious about making appropriate measured steps now. And having some backup plans in the bottom of our desk drawers for if that comes later, and we'll deal with another round of this. But I think it's quite responsible to channel the monies that the school would be able to give back in free cash directly into this fund, because then it can hedge against what, we've just learned. And that, I think, is a better strategy towards at least starting to address this. And if we find out it's worse in the fall, then we'll all deal with that, both town and school together. And if you'd indulge me for 1 second at the microphone, I'm on a weekly call with the Mass Municipal Association, and various state agencies join in the call. I just want to make sure, especially that Paul heard this. We were told that the state's going to be implementing its own 1/12 budget, and they're going to continue to make their various state aid payments on a 1/12 measure, so that it's not that no money's going to be coming in starting in July. It's just going to be based on FY20. So if it was going to go up, that's not what we will not receive that until they make some decisions. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that the tap hadn't been completely turned off.
Brian, I have one thing to add to that too, in terms of your comment. So one of the challenges for us right now is that we don't know what reopening would look like. So I don't know yet.
Question.
Well, no, but I was going to say, we don't know whether we're going to be able to mitigate those special education costs yet. If we reopen in a staggered model, I'm not going to have a shortfall. If we do, then the town can share that burden. And the mechanism for that would be to go back for an additional appropriation at the special town meeting in September. Mm-hmm. So we can go back and push that town cost back to the town in September. I wouldn't want to do it now, because if reopening is a staggered enrollment, I'm not going to have a shortfall in special education, because we'll have savings in transportation. We won't be transporting kids every day. So we'll be able to absorb that. But if we can't, then yes, the town can share that burden, and we'd go back to the fall town meeting for an additional appropriation.
That's if they
I could just build off that, Brian, to say
attendant reimbursement as well, right? Like, isn't that also dependent on your average daily attendance? And there was a special provision, my understanding this spring, was that they weren't changing the state funding based on reductions in daily average attendance because of the state dictates. I thought you said earlier that there wasn't clear guidance on whether or not how that would work.
Right, and that's the problem. So we don't know. If we were returning the way we typically are, we have a couple $100,000 of new costs. If we don't, and we are in a staggered model, we may not have any new costs because of savings in other areas for implementing programs. So I'm reluctant to ask the town to change and cut other departments further at this point, because I might not need it. If we do, then we will be coming back in September to a special town meeting asking the town to appropriate additional funds. We've had to do that once before, and it was, again, a similar situation. We had, it was probably back in 2012, we had a huge spike in summer enrollment for kindergarten, and we had to add a class that was unbudgeted. So we requested the town have a special town meeting, and we asked for an additional $100,000 to fund the teacher and the aide in September. So again, that wasn't within our control. That was a similar situation. So we did go back to the town, and we would do that in September if we had to. I'm reluctant to ask the town to transfer money from a stabilization fund or cut other departments if we don't need to do that. And I won't know that until the DESE guidance comes out in a week or so.
Understood. Thank you. Paul, you had a comment you wanted to share?
I wanted to add, though, that, coming back to the town in the fall has a different flavor for King Philip, because we would need 3 towns to come back in the fall and all be able to then help make us whole again. So that's why the state revenue became a more dramatic piece for us, because it comes directly to us, and to get any kind of relief if we get hit hard would mean 3 towns being able to find money in their budgets to support us on that. And that becomes a little bit trickier at the best.
More complexity, always a good thing, right? Okay, thank you for juggling all of that. And thank you for the questions. Jonathan Hurwitz, yes, sir, your question.
Yeah, this is for Dr. Alardi. I think you actually just answered this in relation to what Brian asked. So forgive me if I don't mean for this to be repetitive, but I would like to restate it. on one of our last meetings, a meeting or 2 meetings ago, this board was discussing perhaps proposing an alternate budget at town meeting in effort to restore a higher level of funding to the Norfolk schools. I think that 2.4%. And it didn't pass. I think it was close. So it was 5-4, something close to that. So it was split. But I won't speak for anyone else, but my perception is that there were a number of people who voted against supporting an alternate motion to get you to the 2.4%, because you specifically said you wouldn't use the money. If that money was afforded to you, you wouldn't use it. And I heard you just say in response to Brian that you still wouldn't be a proponent of, at this point, taking funds out of stabilization or other departments because you still don't know the future. But for clarity's sake, I would like to at least pose the question to you. Obviously, the landscape has changed dramatically since we've had that discussion. So I would at least ask the question directly. If we were to propose a 2.4% budget to the Norfolk schools, would that mitigate any of these issues? Would it allow you to solve some of these problems more easily? Would it take more risk off of the table? What would your answer today be to that 2.4% budget? Would it change from the previous discussion?
Well, it's a very good question, and I appreciate you asking. The challenge for us again, Jonathan, would be we don't know yet if we're going to need that. It's a highly dependent on what the Department of Ed decides for reopening. If we don't need it, I think it would be not healthy if the town would have to go into your stabilization account to fund the schools at the higher level. So you would have to be drawing from the town's emergency reserves to put that money in that we may or may not need. So I think I would still hold the same position that that would be better done in September when we know exactly what the costs are. If you were to do it now and we don't need the money, I think that it would be painful for all the other departments that are making cuts. It would potentially impact the town's bond rating by having less revenue in your town stabilization, and we do not know yet whether we are going to need that money. I mean, I'm always an advocate for every position and for growing the schools, but right now there's so much unknown. Our cost could be higher than what you appropriate for the 2.4, or we could not need the additional funds. So I would prefer if the budget's voted as is and the stabilization fund is voted as is at the higher level at the 250, I will be able to start bringing staff back. And we will prioritize that by classroom positions. Once we have the guidance, I will be able to better determine whether or not we need additional funds to maintain the level of service we're proposing or not. If we don't, I think it's better that the town doesn't dip into that fund yet. If we do, we would want to come back in September to close that gap, but then you'll be voting on a specific number with specific background as to why we need that funding and where the costs will be going. Right now, it would be a guess.
Well, if I can, just with a quick follow-up, I think while yes, we discussed here that a potential source for additional funding could come from emergency or stabilization funds, that's not the only option, right? I wouldn't ask you to make your decision on whether you could use the money out of your concern, whether money would come out of stabilization and it would affect our bond rating and those sorts of things, as much as there are other places in town. Everyone's got a budget. There's other things that can be cut. We're going to be cutting something, clearly. And it's more of a question, I think, the community of, and I'm just picking a random example, so no one pick on me for this, but do we want to cut things from the schools versus the roads versus the emergency services versus the library? There's all kinds of things where monies could be found or at least reallocated outside of emergency and stabilization funds. So I'm sorry if I'm beating this to death, but I'd ask you, does your answer change if you don't have a concern of where the money comes from, but if the money came from some other means aside from emergency and stabilization, does that change your perception on this?
Again, I think it's too early to know, because I would hate to see other departments make cuts if we don't need the funds. Very heavily depending on how the state reopens, we may be fine fiscally for next year. we just don't know yet. And I would hate to have the town make adjustments and cut services from other departments or positions if it's not necessary. If we have a shortfall and I can quantify that and give the advisory board clear information as to what that shortfall is, the town could make those adjustments in September if they're necessary. I'm not sure that they will be, given we're still waiting on guidance. There's still the potential. State is really looking at what their budget will be. There's potential that they will fully fund education. We just don't know. And so to prematurely negatively impact other departments when we're not sure it's going to be needed, I don't think serves the school or the public well. I do appreciate and believe me, I will advocate for that in September. If we have a shortfall and we need funding, we will definitely be advocating for that. We want to maintain the same level of services we have. I just don't know yet if it's needed. So it would be reducing services, hurting other departments, and may not be necessary. I'd rather wait till we know it's necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Susan Klein. Yes, Susan, your question.
Sorry,
I don't think we've gone through all of the members first before going back to the second. Jackie, I'm not sure, has had a chance to speak.
I'm just going in order, but sure. I mean, Susan, was your question quick or?
Well,
Okay,
it was,
just
I've had
after.
my hand up for a very long time. So it was just to circle back to when Paul, sorry, it's just been a long time since I had this question. To circle back to Paul, when you said your 8.5 million, if it comes in from state aid, you should hope that there will be minimal changes. You're projecting the part of the reason with the 35 layoffs, 36, excuse me, if I can't recall the number, is because you were notified that your state aid may drop an additional 10%, which is $850,000. Should that happen, right? We're talking about should the 10% happen, meaning you're now getting 20% less. You already made up the cost for the first 10% you were losing. You now have to find another $850,000 worth of positions, staffing, expenditures, whatever. At that point, I'm assuming you are going to have to dip into this teacher pool of already laid off teachers. Is it 35? Is it 17? Is it 10? If you were to get the 10% less.
I don't have an honest answer for you on that, Susan. What I will share with you is that the only group of professionals in the district that had that June 15th timeline are the people who fall within the teacher licensure area. So teachers, psychologists, nurses, all of those that fall within that area. Within their contract, we had that June 15th layoff notice. We have people in other departments, teacher assistants, secretaries, custodians, cafeteria workers. And as Dr. Alati said, the scenarios look different depending on how we're opening.
Right. No, I get all of that.
So
I think
I can't give you an answer to say that just because I get that notice that it is 20%. We've got a bank of different options on the table as an administrative team. And as we go closer to getting to the opening of school and we see which scenario we're working with, we'll then know exactly how much money we need to cut. And that will give us a better idea. So I can't give you that answer now. I wish I could. I'm not trying to avoid the question.
No, I know you're not. So what I'm trying to get at is if that comes in effect for $850,000, you're not saying now it's going to all be teachers.
Correct.
But you also would basically need to cut $850,000. At this point, all you have left to cut is positions, whether they're teaching or whether they're food services or janitorial or office staff. You will have to cut $850,000 worth of paid positions.
I would say there are probably a few other areas that we can get into, but they are also, again, defined through contract. And I want to be cautious because again, there's so many variables that if I stop putting scenarios out here, it's just going to muddy the waters. But an example is that the contract languages often spell out a requirement to provide a certain amount or reimbursement for a certain amount of professional development. That's contractual. if we need to get to that level of cut, we might sit down with those groups and say, can we cut that amount out this year and not reimburse for that? And what would that save us? So we have a bank of areas that we might look at. But again, professional development might be crucially important if we have to go to complete online synchronous learning, because right now we have just been supporting students at home so that they don't regress. If we have to go to an online platform for long-term virtual learning, then we need professional development. So I don't want to I just want to say that it's mostly, if I have to go beyond a 10% cut from state aid, it's looking at things that may impact people's revenue in some way. It may be layoffs, it might be other things like that. But again, I don't have enough information to tell you which is the best scenario of that. But yes, in some way, some people's income in some way might be affected, whether it's reimbursement for something like that or a staff member that doesn't come back. It gets to that level.
Let me just phrase it slightly differently, just so that I can get an answer on this. Can you say that without a doubt, having to cut an additional $850,000 between now and September will be detrimental to you?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Excellent.
If that's what you're looking for, I didn't mean to. I really didn't. I'm
I'm just trying to make sure that, I guess my point is that I think there is a lot of information being given tonight. And when, it can be hard for the advisory board to absorb who is sitting in this meeting and listening to every word that you're saying and asking questions and having them answered. It is a much different beast for someone who's going to go watch it on YouTube or hear about it from a friend or hear about it in an email. And I just wanted to be very clear. Your position is you have managed the cuts up until this point, but if another 10% comes in, it is going to be extremely detrimental to your program next year, however that may look. And you can't make those decisions because you don't know how school is going to open. But at the very least, there will be positions, people, and salaries that are going to be affected.
I think that is absolutely accurate. And I would say, Susan, if I could, getting to that 10% cut impacts positions. Right now, we have 262 staff members employed by the King Philip Regional Schools. We have a proposal for a few additional positions to support special education services. If we have to get to a 10% cut in state aid, we are not filling some of those proposed positions that we considered part of level service. And there may be positions that were, because of retirements, we would not be filling. But we would not have, we would still be able to call back the people who are currently employed. They might be in different roles, but they would be, and we would be down total number of staff, but the people who are currently employed could be called back. If we get beyond that 10%, not only are we down staff, but we may have to impact in some way some of the staff that are currently employed by us. There would be no way around it at that point.
Okay.
Is that a better, clearer answer for you?
Yes, thank you.
Clarity achieved. Not good news. That's not excellent, but I'm glad we clarified that point. And so thank you for that. With that, we're going to jump to Jackie, who's been extraordinarily patient. Yes, Jackie, your question.
Yeah, so I guess my question goes back to 2 points ago. But like, I guess my point, what I want to ask is, you are on a time limit though. So waiting till fall town meeting doesn't help when you can't just, I'm speaking specifically to high school because that's where I teach, but adding a bunch of foreign language teachers back because you finally get the funding you need doesn't help you September 15th. Classes have been redistributed. I mean, so I guess you were saying like, you wouldn't want us to cut other budgets, other departments, because you don't know what's going to happen. It could also be worse than what we're thinking in a way. And what you've described cutting is the worst stuff for student learning. And the state could say, actually, student to teacher ratios are down to 12:1 and teachers can only see 120 kids a day. So I guess my concern is, and my question would be, how we could alleviate this concern would be, I don't want to enter a school year and then say, oh, we got the money, now we can hire back teachers when it's going to be too late. And I think that for a district that doesn't always keep all their teachers, the best teachers right now are getting new jobs, and we're losing our best teachers in these moments. And I understand there are a lot of districts that are going through this, but there are also districts that are going to be hiring for teachers who have retired. And these are the moments where you lose the best teachers to other districts. And so I'm wondering if I appreciate how much you want to respect the town's budget. And I'm interested in knowing if there's a way that advisory could help. And again, we're not like a budgetary board. We can't just give money away, but if there was a way that it could be helped so that we don't start a year where student learning is already going to be negatively impacted no matter what, making it worse by students not able to take Spanish.
I can speak at the elementary level first. I do appreciate the support and the commitment of the advisory board. For us at the elementary level, you're absolutely correct. We greatly value all of the teachers that we have had to provide. We have great talent within that group. If we are able to appropriate our budget as requested and the stabilization fund is passed, we will be able to begin recalling staff. Our school committee and our administration has always prioritized teaching positions first. So if we do have a shortfall that we need to address in the fall, we will not fill, we have an open assistant principal position. We will not be filling that. There's other things that we will hold off on until we can get that corrected so that we can bring as many staff members back as possible. So we will have the opportunity without delaying our recall to correct things in the fall by not filling other open positions and holding off on some other things until we can get that corrected, that shortfall in the fall. But we can't do anything until we get the budget as proposed and the stabilization fund passed. It is absolutely school committee's priority to bring people back as quickly as possible once we have a certified known budget and we know that we have some protection against unknown costs. So that's the elementary response, but I'm going to defer to Paul because his situation is a little different.
Can I just respond to that though? Like I hear what you're saying, and losing an assistant principal directly impacts the work that teachers can do at the ground level. So I understand that you can move around monies, and I know you're in education, you understand this, but I just want people to understand, like, not filling a position that might feel administrative or clerical.
Absolutely.
The rule that I'll just speak frankly, that puts more work on me, because now instead of assistant principal doing X, that falls on whichever teacher is willing to volunteer their time. And so there's a real impact on student learning when we talk about cuts. And I think that we supported your initial request, which was like, just please support this budget. And it's feeling like if things are going to get worse, I just really don't want our students to be in a worse position and losing these positions that people think are tangential, like talking about not hiring paras help me do my job better. So I just want to make sure people understand there's a cost to this, that it's not just teachers that you need, you need the entire school is supporting the student learning goals.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, we would have the opportunity, if we can correct that at a special town meeting, to restore those positions and bring them back. But I do appreciate KP has a different situation because they have 3 towns to navigate, but I agree with you.
And actually, Paul, sorry, just one point I wanted to throw in before we get to you, just to clarify this. This also gets back to other folks' questions. This is to you, Dr. Lardy. I mean, Jonathan was, I think, really carefully clarifying. On the one hand, how do I say this? An important part that I listen to of what you describe is that despite what's happening, we can go back in fall town meeting and then salvage things, make them better, sort of make it whole in some fashion, assuming that things break our way. There will be an opportunity to then address that. And I think some of the concern, not just speaking to Jonathan specifically, is that, well, is that already too late? You know, is there anything we can do prior to that? You know, that we, and I'm not asking you to revisit it because I think I understand your answer, but I'm just trying to point out to both yourself as well as Paul that, you know, members are looking for opportunities where something could be helpful. And when you say that things can be deferred, great, but really, like, what would the cost of that being? And I think a lot of Jackie's points here are about, has the ship already sailed, you know, losing teachers, the fact that classes are going to have to get redistributed, that when we get to these future moments at fall town meeting or otherwise, we may have less of an ability to then do something because class sizes have already been established or curriculums are already there. So you really can't go back and undo that. So I'm just saying I appreciate you guys framing things in terms of, well, we can make this decision at town meeting, or perhaps if we voted for this resolution or whatnot, like action points that we can take are very helpful, as well as the timing. Yes, now Paul, please.
Sure. So from King Philip's perspective, we're in a different place altogether. And Jackie, you're absolutely right. In previous meetings, when I have been asked about staff, I have said point blank, I need to know exactly what staff I have for teachers in place by August, especially at the high school level, because our students back in the spring created their course selections by level, by subject, by elective that's offered. And I have 1,300 students at the high school level that we have to run schedules for. And if we determine that marine technology is no longer something that we can offer our students, then I've just had 3 sections of that class with 25 kids in each of those sections. 75 kids no longer can take that. That creates a domino effect that ripples all the way through. I can't necessarily adjust one teacher because I have one section that's not being filled, because teachers teach in departments. And so that becomes even more problematic for me. I have to have the schedules run and in place on the first day of school for students. If a student has had a full semester of marine technology and all of a sudden we have a cut, I can't say, I'm sorry, after term 1, you're now going to be put into biology because it's the closest science we have to what you were taking, and marine technology is no longer available. Nor can I say, after a student has taken 1 full term of biology, guess what? Marine technology is now available. You can take it starting in November because the course is already sailed. So you're absolutely right, Jackie. I can't make those kinds of cuts afterwards. I have to live with that. That's why I actually was saying it from the opposite perspective when I was passionately pleading to you before to support the 2.5% budget. Because I also know that the other 2 towns are in a position where they can't support more. The assessments were incredibly wonky this year. I don't know another word to describe it. And so, for example, where they didn't split it all evenly, Rentham's assessment for the 2.5 is still over a 7% increase from last year in difficult budget times. And I'm sure you're all aware at this point that Plainville, the reason why they're holding off their town meeting until July is because they have to still ask their communities for an override so that they can even come close to balancing their budget. So as generous as Norfolk is and how much you're talking about trying to support King Philip, and I can't stress enough how much I appreciate it, I don't anticipate that the other towns will be able to raise their allocations up to meet anything higher that Norfolk might put out there. I think they've been pretty clear with us on that. And they've struggled to only decrease us by that 1%, going from 3.49 to 2.5. They've worked very hard to try to support us at that level. And I appreciate them tremendously because I've been sitting into their meetings, just like I've been in yours all evening tonight. I've been meeting with Plainville twice a month in the evenings to try to work on their financial problem. So that said, my biggest variable right now is the state aid. And I guess if there was someone in the community that was watching and they were looking at something they could do, advocating for the state to continue to support education would be the best way they could help King Philip at this point. And advocating for our legislators to give us some kind of guidance as to what they will be giving us as a budget. I don't need the state to pass a budget in the middle of July, but if they can at least say that the budget we're moving forward with would not cut state aid to schools more than X, then I have something to work with and I know what I can start to call back teachers for. So that's where my problem is. For me, I've been saying it right along. I am incredibly fortunate that all 3 communities have been as supportive as you all have been. I can't stress that enough, and I hope everybody walks away knowing that. My problem is around state aid, and as Dr. Alati described, not knowing what the fall will bring. So you're right, Jackie. As of August, if I don't have a clear budget, we're going to be going with less because I can't add it in afterwards. And we'll try to cut as many things in other areas that we could bring back in the fall. And we'll be making those best decisions we can at that point.
Follow-up question, Jackie.
Nope, thank you so much.
All right. And I know you're trying to pick something obscure, Paul, but I'll just say that I did my undergraduate work at UC Santa Barbara, really big marine sciences program. So
That's why I said marine
You'll notice.
technology. And
Technology,
We don't offer
okay,
it.
fair
We
enough.
don't offer anything in marine.
Fair enough.
I was
fair
so worried that if I said physics or some particular
enough. Sorry,
subject, somebody would hear that and think, "Oh my gosh, we're now canceling this particular program or this subject in the schools." So,
Brian, did you have an additional question?
I do. I had a couple thoughts. One thought was actually a discussion we had before about the need to have folks with financial degrees involved. And it seems like this is an instance where being a CPA may not actually contribute much to it. But luckily enough, I have a PhD in decision-making under uncertainty, which seems relatively convenient at this moment where we're trying to make a decision under uncertainty. What we would like to do, and I really appreciate Dr. Alardi's being nice and not saying we should cut other people's budget. But if the reality is that the state aid is likely to come in lower than expected, and nothing I've heard today says that the reasonable estimate, the midpoint estimate of where we think state aid would come in is anything but lower than the original estimate we passed the budget under that assessment. So any reasonable cut below, or any reasonable expectation of a cut below where we passed our budget, is effectively the way we minimize the impact across the entire town, is to right size that share across all departments in all categories. So, I mean, I fully get it feels like, well, it could go the other way and we could be the bad person in that scenario, but that's just as unlikely as it being twice as big as expected. And the way you would do this to minimize the thrash across all departments is to say, what do we think the most likely scenario is, and to build towards that and minimize the thrash across everybody. So I mostly make that comment to the advisory board on how we would maybe like to think about this, but it is not it's so to put in financial terms, it's more of a mark to market. You put in the revenue what you think it actually is worth at this point, and even though we haven't sold the asset and realized the losses, any reasonable expectation would show that there'd be a loss in revenue going forward. And I think it would be silly to say we couldn't, prior to passing the budget, address those anticipated shortfalls in advance.
Brian, do you think the use of stabilization in any way changes that calculus, or that option doesn't really factor into the baseline that you think would be wise?
How you fund that risk tolerance is ultimately a different decision on, do you want to use the stabilization fund or take proportional cuts across the rest of the budget. That's a managerial decision on where you think you source that from. So no, I don't think the source of funds would significantly influence the decision that you'd make on relative budgets.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. Okay, other questions? I haven't gotten any hands raised from the public. I would be happy to, seeing no other advisory committee questions, happy to take some.
Can I just respond to
yes, please, Ingrid, go ahead.
Comment. So again, the two districts have very different potential shortfalls. So for us, similar to what you're saying, our biggest concern is the increase in special education costs. The state aid for our budget, the majority of it, Chapter 70 money, goes to the town. So if you vote our budget and that comes in lower, then the town has to fix that issue. It doesn't come directly out of my budget. So that would be a default to the town. For us, the special education costs, the best way the advisory board can support us is to approve that stabilization fund. The other state aid that we get directly that might come in shortfall would be the circuit breaker, which is also a special education fund. So by appropriating and supporting that stabilization at the elementary level, you're mitigating the potential risks that we would have for losing state funding for circuit breaker and those unexpected costs. At the KP level, it's a different situation because they get the state aid directly. So we won't be as impacted by that loss. And the advisory board can support us with that stabilization. And I also would encourage the board to consider signing on to that resolution. The more communities that support that going forward, the more likely we are to help KP in mitigating that gap.
Yeah, Dr. Lardy, is there again a time frame? I know that we have to pass it, but I think I see you raising your hand, Dave. Hang on a second. Dr. Lardy, like when do you need us to take action on that by?
There's not, the earlier the better.
Okay.
The school committee's considering it the 25th, on Thursday the 25th, and we'll be sending that directly to the governor's office. They're in budget debates right now. So the sooner, I mean, I'd be happy to send them together with the school committee's resolution if you are interested in that, or you could send it separately, but the sooner the better, because the state is trying to establish their state budget and they're in budget hearings now. So the more response they get soon, the better influence we may have collectively.
And KP School Committee on Monday evening, actually the last school committee meeting, approved a resolution, excuse me, that was sent to our federal reps and senators, basically asking them at the federal level to appropriately fund the state's education, so that, you know, that trickle down effect, that if they're putting money to support or try to re-energize the economy, that they need to have some of that money coming to the to these education communities. When we had the recession in 2008, there was considerably more federal money, federal dollars that came to the state level and came quicker than what's coming right now. I don't care whether it comes from the state or the federal. I just want the money.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that very much, as do we. Blythe, you had your hand up. You had a point you wanted to add before I go on?
I just wanted to support what Ingrid just said about the stabilization fund. I mean, as she said, if it wasn't going into that fund, it would be coming back and would become free cash, which can be used in more different ways across the organization. But recognizing what the school is up against, I think it's very appropriate use of the funds, and I would hope that the advisory would support that.
Okay, thank you. David, you had a question. David Lutz.
My only comment was on that resolution that we should probably maybe put it on the agenda for our meeting before town meeting.
Agreed. That's what I was thinking. I'll pass it out to everybody.
That's why my hand's up.
I'm sorry, Susan, didn't see you.
That's okay. I can't raise my hand because I'm a
I know when you're
co-host.
moderator or host.
I will, if you would like, I will, I have posted for that meeting already,
Please do. Yes.
but I will add that if it's something that the board decides, the committee decides they'd like to do.
Can we have
Yeah.
5-minute debate tops on that? I'm asking
Hopefully.
for a rules change that we only allow 5 minutes of discussion on that before we vote on it or not.
Well, we have the rule where we can move to closed discussion at any time. All I need is a majority, but I don't know it's going to require that much. I mean, we're talking
So
like
either I'm
couple
making-
paragraphs. What's that?
I'm making a joke, trying to lighten the mood here a little bit.
Okay. Well, as the moderator, I take everything deadly seriously. I have no choice, right? Okay. I don't see any other hands up. Okay. Well, this has been very informative. Thank you so much for helping us understand and do our part to navigate these extraordinary eddies and flows of the rapids that are this year's budget. No one has asked for this situation. I think we're all trying to do the best that we can. Thank you very much to both Paul and Ingrid for your leadership, as well as Blythe helping us all work through this. So thanks to you all. We have our next meeting, and I should say our next agenda item. Let's talk a little bit about the format of town meeting. Susan, did you want to share about, I think we're scheduled to meet at what time? Kind of trying to pull that up. You're still muted, Susan.
We usually
Arthur, if
meet
you're
an
moving on to
hour
another
Sorry.
item, you all said with the superintendents. I'm sorry, Susan, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, go ahead. What was the question?
I was just asking if, are you all set with the superintendents if you're moving on to another item?
Yes, I believe that we are. Thank you.
Then this is my upteenth Zoom of the week, so I want to say thank you all so much for your support. I really can't stress that enough. But I will say good night at this point then, and wish you well.
Thank you. Good night to you both. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Okay, Susan Jacobson, back to you.
Sure. So we are scheduled to meet at 6 o'clock. Blythe has secured a separate room where I understand we can social distance. I know that there has been some discussion about some of the advisory board members are more comfortable being outside than inside. So I think as we get a little closer to that, we can figure out the logistics.
Yes, I received some emails to that effect. So thank you. I know that there will be, if the rain cooperates and does not happen, I believe there is a plan to have and accommodate outside participation. So we'll just see how that works in terms of our earlier meeting. Okay. And we had no minutes to approve. Did folks have any questions about town meeting itself that on the advisory committee they wanted to raise?
This is Kiara. This will be my first time at town meeting as an advisory board member. Can you just give a overview of what to expect? Thanks.
So sure, we show up early and we have a very quick meeting.
Can I interrupt for a second just
Go
to
ahead.
make it a little funny? Kiara, this is probably the worst one for
Yeah.
you to say is your first one. I mean, you're coming in for a doozy.
Trial by
Budget,
fire, you know?
There's a budget, there's an election, there's a pandemic. I mean, holy heck.
Yeah, there's a whole lot going on in much calmer times. We'll call those the good old days. We didn't think they were the good old days, but back in the good old days. Yeah, so we meet, and then after we take care of any last minute business, we coordinate with Blythe, and the select board may have some last minute wrinkles, and the moderator, of course. Everyone has their motions all set out, and then we would normally all sit down in front of the stage. And as the moderator then goes through and introduces warrants, the warrant and specific articles, we are then recognized. So folks need to know what articles that you're responsible for, which I believe that we all do. And then when you're sort of recognized to then stand up, the moderator recognizes you, and then you read your article, and then you read the narrative, the recommendation, which the advisory committee made, and then it's just opened up for questions. Yes, Susan Jacobson.
So one of the things, Arthur, that I think we should, and I know that Kevin and Blythe and Jay have been working hard on trying to make this comfortable for everybody.
And
But
streamlined.
if we do have some advisory board members that choose to sit outside, are they going to be, logistically, and I can speak to Blythe about it tomorrow, are they logistically, is there going to be a microphone outside? Are they going to be able to get up and say their motion? So I think we should iron that out.
Yes, and you want to be at the microphone pretty much as the moderator. So if you're doing Article 10 and they're finishing up Article 9, then is the time to get up and make your motion and such. Blythe, did you have some commentary you wanted to share?
That's correct. So there'll be a deputy moderator kind of handling the outdoor area in concert with Jay. And I know that we should have sufficient microphones with microphone sleeves via sandwich bag to have people be able to get up and speak from there throughout the meeting. So I think what I understood was that only there'd be a de minimis number of people up at the front. Jay, the chairs, town council, myself, perhaps the town clerk, perhaps Todd, to be able to answer questions and field most things, and everybody else can be dispersed in wherever they feel most comfortable sitting.
Something that will also be different, Kiara, this year is we're going to be able to batch or bundle articles. It's called a consent calendar. So we'll talk about that a little bit the evening, the meeting before. It's all in the evening. How you may have been responsible for writing up probably a brief explanation for some very routine articles. All those are going to get concatenated together, and there'll be one vote on a whole bunch of them. So you won't need to go to the microphone for each one of those. So that's a very different wrinkle. I've never had a consent calendar at a town meeting before, so that'll be a first for me as well. But again, typically for articles that are not on the consent calendar, just watch when it's your time to get up and be at a microphone, and you'll be recognized. And then you read the motion. Blythe has done a nice job of writing up all of our motions. So you read the motion, moderator recognizes you, then you read whether we supported it or didn't and why. Anyone else want to add something for Kiara's trial by fire here?
Yeah. just to say that there are lots of people around to help out. So,
Yeah.
you know, and even up to in official capacity, like Jay can do some stuff. You're not alone.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
our-
Really
yeah.
appreciate it.
Yeah, and we're not talking about C-SPAN. This isn't the floor of the Senate or the floor of the House. So yeah, there isn't that kind of pressure. Don't worry about it.
Thank you.
Okay.
House or Senate when they give those speeches, by the way, so.
I have to say, watching the British Parliament is much more interesting. You actually get actual debate in
Yeah,
House of
exactly.
Commons and stuff. That's much more spicy and entertaining. Anyway, okay, I think is there anything that I'm missing off the agenda, Susan? Yes, Mike. You
No,
had a
we're
question?
good.
No?
We're good.
Sorry, I
Okay.
don't want to add other things, but
Okay.
can I ask a quick question on Blythe?
Sure.
So watching yesterday's select board meeting about the Board of Health position, and what wasn't clear to me in that meeting was if there was an action or no action.
No action. It was a discussion because one of the members has been recently advocating for a part-time director. And so we spoke, after speaking with Kevin, I called Tom Gilbert and said, would the Board of Health members like to come and start a discussion and see where we might want to go with that as first step. And so that's what happened last night.
Susan Jacobson, yes, you had a point.
Sure. Just before we go, I had mentioned to you, Arthur, earlier, but the
Zoning.
planning board did meet last evening, and I know that it is in the warrant and it was approved by the advisory committee. But I spoke with Rich McCarthy today, and the citizens petition article was a 2-2 vote, so it was not a favorable vote by the planning board.
Did someone just abstain or was there?
My understanding is someone was not in the meeting, did not attend.
Thank you.
Sure.
Can I add one more thing, Arthur?
Sure, go for it.
So I'll send out the all articles presentation shortly. It's almost done, which is, we're not going to have any anything shown on the screen at the meeting. Everyone will have a handout of what they usually see. And I do need to I did make one change to the motions that I hope everybody caught, which was to change Article 4, which is the COLA adjustment for non-union employees. I would like that motion from advisory to be to indefinitely postpone that, because we, as part of our budget balancing, we decided to not go ahead with COLAs for non-union employees this year. And based on the conversation tonight about Article 10 for the school special ed reserve, I would change that motion from 100,000 to 250. So those are two differences that I just want to make sure everybody's aware of.
Okay, thank you. David, you had a comment on that.
Oh, can I ask? Because I think the recommendation that went into the warrant was we'll make a recommendation at town meeting, correct? For the COLA one?
Correct.
I wrote it, so that's why I'm asking.
Correct.
Well, I can change it to say.
No, hold on. So what's in the warrant? I didn't read it. I'm sorry. I got it in the mail. Does it say indefinitely postpone, or does it say what I wrote?
It says what you wrote, but now when we get to the actual motions, assuming ahead of your voting that you would be
IP it, yeah.
an IP.
All right. We'll discuss that at the meeting because
It's a little hard because I need to print a whole bunch of copies before we get there, or have it say something.
The warrant says we're going to make our recommendation at town meeting, so there's no reason to print anything.
Well, no, I think she's talking about the motions, David.
I understand, but we made a motion to make the recommendation at town meeting.
Correct, but I'm saying, right, yes, and no one's suggesting a change to that. However, separate from that, as a courtesy, Blythe actually prints out what we're going to say just so we can all have a clean copy to share. So that actually does need to say something.
I think I understand what David's saying and I respect that. So perhaps the best thing to do is just to
Leave it blank.
It says in the warrant and then just tell people at the meeting.
Yes, we'll just write it in the day of.
I'm sorry, but yeah,
Why we talk about these things.
yep.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions people have? Mike, yes, I see your hand up.
Sorry. So for Article 10, do we have to revote this now that's changed?
I will be accepting a motion, and yes, we do need to vote on this, correct?
At the meeting beforehand?
Yes, at the meeting beforehand.
Okay.
That's what it means to say we're going to make a recommendation at town meeting.
Great.
No, but I'm just saying that in what went out says we approved.
Hang on one at a time. Okay, Mike, I think I got your point. David, I didn't catch yours.
I think he's saying we approved 100,000. We're now approving 250. We have to vote that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was still on the
No.
the different article.
On the
Yes,
other
we will vote to reconsider.
Okay.
So do you
I'll
want
take a
to,
motion. I'll take a motion to reconsider on the day of.
so let me change that motion back to 100,000. So it's what you already voted. And then at the meeting, you can speak
Modify it. Yeah,
number.
yeah, correct.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll have some procedures to take care of. That's why we meet earlier. All is well. Seeing no other questions, I will take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Listening for that second.
Second.
Okay, I heard Susan Klein first. Thank you, David and Susan. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of adjournment, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
That was rather feeble, but I